Hello, and thank you for joining me on this podcast, From Experience, the Grief Collection. I'm your host, Bianca Welsh. I'm a mum, a lost mum, a restaurateur with a behavioural science degree, and a proclivity for all things to do with trauma, grief, and mental illness. I've got a lot of personal lived experience, and this is the podcast I wish I had after experiencing my own grief and loss. So why would I do a grief podcast? What might I add to the vast podcast world? I'll provide you with stories that might help you feel seen, feel less alone in what you're experiencing or have experienced, perhaps an idea on how to navigate the healing journey, because there's no playbook for grief. There's no guide. We all grieve differently, thus we all heal differently. Perhaps you're helping support someone on their grief and loss journey. Maybe you're just curious about how some people overcome the worst time of their lives. The thing with grief is that this is the one given in life. It is the one thing we will all experience at some point, the loss of someone or something that we love. As the great wordsmith and musician that is Nick Cave quotes in a letter to a fellow griever, if we love, we grieve. That's the deal. That's the pact. Grief and love are forever intertwined. Grief is the terrible reminder of the depths of our love, and, like love, grief is non-negotiable. End quote. Yet we rarely talk about it in the Western world. We're never prepared for it, but perhaps we can never be prepared for it. I wasn't, but I hope if we were more open to talking about it and aware of other people's journeys and stories, we might feel less alone in the dark depths of grief, and perhaps the healing journey might not feel as daunting. Just a heads up, on today's episode we'll be talking about stillbirth among other topics. If this is too much for you today, maybe come back another time. If you need support or resources, please see the show notes or reach out to your loved ones who make you feel safe and seen. I acknowledge the Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the original owners of this island, Trawana Lutruwita, Tasmania. I'm on the country where the Taranata Panir, Paninaher and Lita Myarina clans of the Stony Creek Nation converged. I pay my respects to elders past and present and recognise the deep connection to the land and waterways. I express my gratitude in being able to live, work and play on this beautiful country. Sovereignty was never ceded. I honour the rich tradition of storytelling as a vital way of passing down knowledge, culture and history through generations. Today I have my very dear friend Emily Judd here to chat to us about her story. We have become incredible friends and an incredible comfort for each other through our journeys. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Bianca, and thanks for having me. I live here in Launceston, married, and we have 3 children. I'm a legal practitioner here. My husband has his own business. And with our 3 children, we have 2 little girls who might not have been here actually, and 1 little boy who isn't. Our eldest, Lydia, she is now 6. And when we were pregnant with her, I had quite a high-risk pregnancy. Didn't really realise at the time, but now looking back and knowing what we were told by our obstetrician, it really was a high-risk pregnancy. And she came early on her own terms. And ever since she's done things on her own terms. She is a strong-willed, sensitive little soul. We then have Jack, our second. So we waited some time before making the decision to add to our family for various reasons. But when we decided the time was right, we were pregnant with Jack. And we had a very uneventful, straightforward pregnancy. Jack was due to arrive on our 5th wedding anniversary, actually, on the 8th of October. And I remember thinking that when we were given that date, that I would forever be sharing a wedding anniversary and a birthday, perhaps baking a cake on our wedding anniversary. But 3 days before the 8th of October, we found out that he had very suddenly and unexpectedly died. So he was stillborn at full term on the 5th of October. And then we have our third child, Adeline. Some people refer to the baby born after loss as a rainbow baby, so she's our rainbow baby. And she arrived early, very early into this world. It was planned, of course, but just as a precaution. So she arrived nearly a month early, but she's a very strong little thing, spirited. So has remained so. So they are our 3 children.
And I think I know where they get that strong spirit from, knowing you now. So there's so much to unpack here. Perhaps one day we can do a whole interview about pregnancy after loss, as that is a really full-on and traumatic process. And as my therapist had said, it's the highest form of exposure therapy you can go through after loss. And when she said that, I went, that is 100% true. Let's talk about Jack and your experience and the journey of how that happened from the moment you knew that he was not going to be born alive to now. And the point of this podcast is for us to sort of more focus on what is useful for the healing process. But a large part of how to heal is understanding the story and the events of what occurred. Could you share a little bit more about Jack?
Sure. So we didn't know, like with all of our children, whether we were having a boy or a girl. I was already on maternity leave with Jack, having decided that 24 hours wasn't quite enough with Lydia. So I was on maternity leave and preparing for our second child's arrival. And one morning I woke up and it really was an ordinary day. And I know some people say that there was something about the day that their life changed forever. Some people don't, and for me it was just an ordinary day. I would have no idea how that day was going to end up the way that it did. But for whatever reason, we went to the hospital for a check because things just hadn't felt quite right. So we made our way to the hospital. We didn't take anything with us. I really did think that I was going in for a routine check. I had done so with Lydia and I really did think that that was all we were going in for. So we went to the hospital and there are still things that are really difficult for me to talk about. I don't often think back to that time. And when I do, it does actually feel like I'm talking about someone else. And I think how devastatingly sad and traumatic it is. And then I remember that that was actually me in that room with Nick. But to cut a particularly long story very short, we were told that our baby didn't have a heartbeat. And when you're told that news, I wish I could say that there was this, I just knew. Just before the news was delivered, I just knew. And when they told us, I didn't have a particular reaction. I've since spoken to other mums and I've heard their stories, and they'll talk about this wailing that they then realised was themselves. But I was utterly silent. It's like I couldn't actually find any words or anything. The room was utterly silent. And in a lot of ways, I feel like that has been quite symptomatic of my grief and my experience. I have found it really difficult to articulate and find the words for how I'm feeling, and I find it difficult to find the words to convey receiving those news, that shock and that trauma. But after hearing that news, things happen really quickly. And what I do remember about that, time is this sudden, firm resolve that I needed to focus on what was happening right now and not think ahead, because I could feel the anxiety and the panic, and I could feel it all just below the surface. And what I don't think people realise is when you've been told that your baby has passed, things happen quite quickly and things need to happen. And one of the more mortifying things is the realisation that that baby still needs to be delivered into the world. And so I made a very, very deliberate decision that I would only concentrate on the 5 minutes ahead of me. Because to be honest with you, I don't know how I would have got through if I thought about what was to happen next. So for the next 24 hours, it was 5 minutes at a time. And that's something that I come back to even now when things are really difficult, is I just remind myself that I don't need to focus on tomorrow or next week. Just focus on the 5 minutes that are in front of you. So that's what I did.
And I think that's amazing and very wise. And in traumatic situations, the brain and body disconnects, and to try to stay in the present, I guess, can be conducive to it being a little bit helpful to get through that moment and not looking too far ahead. And it's interesting that you still use that to this day.
Yeah, I still do. But it was a really big, well, it's clearly a really big thing, but I could just feel that underlying panic and emotion, and I just knew that to get through it, that's all I could do, is just focus on the 5 minutes, because I had to get through delivering our baby and meeting our baby, and I also knew that it would also mean saying goodbye to our baby. And so if I let my mind think about any of those things, I felt like I was going to malfunction. Yeah. So we stayed at the hospital and Jack was born in the very early hours of the next morning.
I'm so sorry. No matter how many times I hear your story and others, I mean, we talk about our boys often, and it still floors me that this actually happened to you and happened to me, and how we survived it. Like, we're still here talking about it today. I think in that moment, you really feel like you are not going to survive it. Something is going to come and just wipe you out. It's not necessarily in a suicidal sense or in a death sense. It's just that you just physically and mentally feel like you are not going to survive the pain that it is to meet them, knowing that you're going to say goodbye to them at the same time.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And so when we met Jack, and look, I am an intensely private person. I have found it really difficult to share, not always being able to find the words. But this is Jack's story, and even though it is a sad one, it is his story, and he is a part of our family, and he was the most beautiful baby, and we want people to know about him. And his story is also not just a sad one, which I'm sure we'll get to. And what we've talked about lots is our boys have also brought with them things that were really quite unexpected to our lives as well. And so we want to share Jack with the world.
It can be quite confusing, isn't it, when I remember looking at pictures of people that have had a stillborn or a baby that has died, and sometimes they might be smiling in a picture, and I always was really confused by that something in a time that must be so incredibly painful and there's a smile. But I've got now pictures of my husband and I, and we have a little smile, because it is still this strangely joyous thing to meet this little person that you made, that was made with love, and they're a part of you. But it's really hard to describe, isn't it? That they bring joy and sadness at the same time. And I guess for both of us, we've had to learn how to hold the light and the dark almost constantly throughout our day, every day since then.
That is so true because, and when you think about that moment when you are meeting your baby for the first time, when you know you're not going to bring them home, that's exactly what that moment is. So for most people, when they have a baby, the first time that they see their baby, it's really, I mean, you and I had both had living children when we had our boys, and there's really nothing like that moment when you first meet your baby. And you've created this beautiful little baby with someone, you know, that you really love, and you've both created this beautiful little baby. You know, you think it's the most perfect looking baby, and you look back at photos later. No. But there's no other feeling like it. And when I met Jack, that feeling was no different to when I met Lydia. But it also comes with, there is joy and there is love, but it comes with that immense sadness because you know you're never going to bring them home. And to me, to hold that love and that sadness together at the same time, firstly, as you've just said, you'll learn to hold those two feelings for the rest of your life. But secondly, the thing that struck me was that was the very definition of my heartbreaking, to have that love and that sadness all at the same time.
It's almost like a physical sensation as well as psychologically, mentally, everything. You can almost feel your heart breaking in two. Is that what it was like for you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then, of course, comes the time that you know you're going to have to say goodbye to your baby, and that will forever remain the hardest thing that I have ever done.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Of all the things that you have to go through to get through the birth, to be delivered the news, nothing prepares you for saying goodbye to them in the physical sense.
Yeah.
For the last time.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about the time you spent with Jack in hospital? I think the logistics of it is something that I wasn't prepared for. I know that for my husband was quite confronted and was not aware that we would actually spend some time in hospital with him. And unfortunately, we're not well prepared or educated as to what we can do and what we probably should do in that time when we're incredibly traumatized, we're in shock, we've just been through birth. There's so much that's going on. How important that short window of time is and how you spent it with him.
Yes, I do want to preface this by saying that this is something that I continue to work through, because I think for a large part of it, for the rest of my life, I will carry a lot of guilt about the time that I spent with Jack and what we did and didn't do. And I'm still working through that, but I have to remind myself that we did the best that we could at the time with the information that we had. And that is why I am, for want of a better word, really passionate about letting people know what their options are and the resources and memory making and all those kinds of things. Because whilst I can't fault the care and the service that we received, we're not educated about it enough. And there are so many more things that I've since found out that we could have done that I wish that we had done. Because as you've just explained, what's not explained, I think, well, is that you know this is the only time that you're ever going to have with your baby, but it is still an opportunity to make memories. And you just don't know. So yes, we did spend some time with Jack. We were told that we could spend as little or as much time as we wanted, but we didn't know what that meant and we didn't know what we could do. And we were in a hospital room. It looks like a hospital, just like any other hospital room, and that was also really difficult. It didn't feel conducive to creating those memories. So some of the things, for example, I wish we had done with him include reading a book with him, because one really important thing that I've learnt since having Jack is that we actually go on to parent Jack, but just in a completely different way. And that's something I've really had to learn, and I've had to learn how to not only parent him but include him in our family. And I wish we had done things like read books to him, because then we could read those books with our girls and talk about it in that way. So we didn't do enough with him, but there was never going to be enough time and there was never going to be enough memory making. But there were some things that I wish that we could have done. We did do some things, like some immediate family came to meet Jack, and I'm so glad that they did, because one thing that's really difficult about the death of a baby is that there are no shared memories. So even if you can't share that time they did something with other people, because they don't know this baby that you've lost. And it was really important to us that immediate family could meet him, because he really was such a beautiful, perfect looking baby. And I know that everyone says that, but I was so afraid before I met him of what that was going to be and what that was going to look like. But in our case, it just looked like he was sleeping. He was a perfect little baby with this round face and these gorgeous chubby cheeks and definite chin and dark hair and these beautiful pouty lips. And so Lydia met her little brother, and she still talks about it to this day, about what he looked like. So that was really important for us, really important. And I can only imagine how difficult it must have been for mothers many years ago who were never given that opportunity. For me, it was incredibly important, because I think it would have felt like a dream. So to be able to see him and know, as hard as it was, that he wasn't opening his eyes, it was important, I think, given what had just happened and what we had just learnt. Because it was hard enough when we came home, and you and I have talked about this in the past as well, people's reactions, we know it's a really difficult thing to deal with, but so many people will often not know what to say, and so you're left with almost them pretend, or not even acknowledging it, so it's like you weren't even pregnant. Yeah, so it was
Which
really
adds
important.
to the experience of the trauma, to have it not acknowledged. We've both come so far in learning how important it is to be seen, acknowledged and heard. And for someone just to say, and I know some people who've experienced loss don't like the term "I'm sorry for your loss," but I think we've both agreed that that is just simple enough in a conversation at some point for that other person to acknowledge that we have lost something.
Yes.
And then you can just carry on with a conversation. It doesn't have to be dwelled upon. It doesn't have to be this really big thing. But as long as they've acknowledged you've just been through birth, like you've been through a huge physical feat, but also you've also just been through the most traumatic experience anyone could ever imagine, and that it's not acknowledged. I find it so bizarre when it comes to mental illness and mental health and with things like loss. If someone's got a broken arm, you usually inquire, what happened? Did you fall over? Did you?
That's right.
You question what's wrong with the person. And we've got this invisible trauma. We've often talked about it after we had the boys, and you would walk down the street, and because we were visibly not pregnant, we didn't visibly have any wounds on us. We didn't look like we were in pain, but we were in so much pain. And for that to be acknowledged by someone who knew what we'd been through, or would just inquire maybe about how have you, they might not have even known that you were pregnant and what you'd been through, but just to inquire and ask how you are, and to have that space and an allowance to be able to say it, of what has happened to you, can go such a long way in the healing process of someone who's been through this experience.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. Another thing that I've learnt is and this goes for anyone who's experienced some sort of loss or trauma, I think people innately want to make that person feel better. And there is just nothing. There is absolutely nothing that you could say to make that better. If you think that you can do that, it's just impossible. So I know that when I approach people who experienced, that now, just that recognition that there's nothing that I can say, and I'm so sorry.
Yes.
But the acknowledgement is everything. And even just saying that I don't know what to say is just better than pretending that it didn't happen.
And it goes to what trauma-informed practice is. Being trauma-informed is that you're essentially just trying to make someone's day less shit than it needs to be. And you can't make, as you said, you can't make it better. You can't improve the situation, but you can help someone's day be less awful than it needs to be. And if that is just being acknowledged, the thing we often hear as lost parents or people who've experienced loss is, I didn't want to upset you. Well, how can we forget? Mm-hmm. We can't forget
such a misconception.
The love of our life being taken away from our arms. We can't, that's not something we can forget. You don't forget that you've got a kid. Like, that's just not something that can be erased. Mm-hmm. So you can never upset us anymore. What we've been through is the worst. Mm-hmm. Exactly. But you can make the experience harder for someone. There's a difference, I think, between upsetting someone and you making that harder. And by making it harder is not acknowledging it, or by saying something really inappropriate, being surprised that you haven't moved on, sort of thing. Or some terms have come up and some questions that you and I have been asked over the years, now sadly years it has been for us, have made our experience just that more unpleasant than it needs to be.
Yes, exactly. And it's so important, because one thing that was said to me early on, not a particularly kind or sensitive comment, but it was along the lines of, well, there are always going to be triggers or things in your life. And I thought, well, yes, they are, but they're on me, and I can recognise those and manage those. But what I really don't need is for you to make them even more difficult. You and I have talked about this in the past. There'll be lots of things in our lives that can be really difficult to manage, and I don't think people realise that. And it can be as simple as, for example, I will never be able to go to a kid's birthday party and hear happy birthday being sung without feeling an intense grief that Jack will never get to grow and will never sing happy birthday to him. Driving past schools and seeing school kids come out, there's always that moment where I think about Jack. So there are everyday things that happen all the time, which you and I talk about often, that remind us that our boys aren't here and make things difficult. But what is helpful is if people can be a little bit more mindful of those things and not make them more difficult than they need to be.
That's right. And it's those secondary losses that we're essentially talking about, and they come thick and fast. And it's not just the primary loss is the loss of them, and those secondary losses you experience every single day. I know for me, to see brothers play together, because we have an older son, it's like a dagger in my heart when I see that. We'll never get to see that. Mm-hmm. There's just so many situations, and you're right, happy birthday for me. I find the happy part painful. Yeah. Like, I don't really agree, but it is. Mm-hmm. Like when people might wish us a happy birthday for Herb, our son that died. Is it happy? But it is, because he did still exist. Mm-hmm. So it's those two things at the same time. Yeah. Again, it's that light and the dark. Yeah. That's really hard to hold sometimes. It's like a hot plate. Yeah. Sometimes it's just warm and you can hold it and it's okay, and then other times it's like it's really, really hot and you don't want to hold the light and the dark at the same time.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about what has helped and what hasn't helped in terms of your healing, having to navigate parenting still, your living child Lydia, and then having to navigate the work world and how that, like, I don't think a lot of people realise there's bereavement pay you can access. You got to tick a form, you got to tick a form whether or not you want to get a birth certificate for your deceased child. Like there's a lot of logistics that have to happen afterwards.
So I think perhaps if I start with what didn't help, because it kind of leads into what did, but what didn't help was whilst we were in the hospital, you're told about this is a really big thing and it's really important that you look after yourself, and there's and all kinds of things, and they really mean well. But then there's no aftercare, there's no continuity of care, there's no linking you into those services. And I just don't think people realise that. Like, we really did leave that hospital postpartum and went home with nothing. No baby, no continuity of care.
Completely empty-handed.
Yes. We asked for referral to a psychologist, noting that what we'd been through was really big, but there weren't at the time psychologists who specialised in baby loss and that kind of area that we were looking at. The only option for myself, at least at the time, was to be referred back to my GP, go on a mental health care plan, be referred to a psychologist, which had an immense waiting time. So firstly, it was just the arbitrary fact that I had to go back to my GP, explain what happened, and justify the trauma and grief of losing our son to go onto a mental health care plan. I was told that I could be waiting 6 to 9 months, but I was fortunate in that through a private referral, through a friend, I was able to get an appointment with a psychologist 4 months later. And when I did, she really did acknowledge and recognise the fact that it was less than ideal, that there needed to have been some earlier intervention. So they're things that I didn't find helpful, and afterwards I found out that there are some incredible resources and services out there, but no one tells you about them. So some of the things that I'd wish I'd known about were Red Nose offer a hospital to home program where they can link you into these services. They can help you with the practicalities like organising forms with Centrelink, registering birth and death certificates, funerals, which is another thing that you and I have spoken about before. All the things that people don't think about, you actually still need to go through all of that with your baby. All of those kinds of things. The Gidget Foundation offer an incredible service. There are some amazing things out there, but if you don't know about them, you can't access them. So that's why I think it's really important that people know their options. So for me, that didn't work well. I wish I'd known about them and was linked into them, because with the benefit of hindsight and also the recognition of my psychologist, I know that it was really damaging to my own mental health. There's this incredible mother's guilt that we all carry, and that guilt was present right from the early days and carried me right through, and I'm still dealing with that. So I really wish that I'd had access to some professional services earlier. And so that didn't work well. But what has worked well is that I'm doing those traditional forms of talk therapy. I still see a psychologist. One thing that has been difficult is because I was pregnant with Adeline within the first year after losing Jack. A lot of that was delayed. We didn't, as you mentioned right at the beginning, being pregnant after a loss is a whole nother ballgame. It is exposure therapy at its finest, but it also means that a lot of the therapy that I needed to have couldn't be done because I was effectively pregnant again and I was managing that. So I'm still working through all of those things, and now just trying some alternative or different forms has really helped. I've never really been that way inclined, but it's been really helpful. So
I think you need to preface that you're quite a cynical person and that doing these alternative things have been really quite surprising for everyone.
Definitely. But once again, yes, I am, and I do find it hard. My psychologist has informed me that I am that classic avoider, and yes, it tends to be push everything difficult right down and not think about it. But I also recognised how important it was going to be, and I knew that I needed to deal with these things and process them. And because I am an avoider, I needed to force myself to do them. So yes, doing the traditional forms, but also some alternative things just to help. I'm not a natural One of the first things that will be recommended to a lot of people and was recommended to me was to journal. I'm not naturally that way inclined. I found it really difficult, and didn't come to me naturally, so I couldn't do it. So trying things like kinesiology, getting into some breath work, meditation, all of those kinds of things, just to see what works for me. So I'm still in the process of figuring that out. Yeah.
Fantastic. And would you say that the avoidance stuff served you for the period of time that it needed to serve you?
Yes and no. So I think it is a coping strategy. I did return to work quite early after losing Jack. I look back now and I actually am not quite sure how I handled that. So it is a coping mechanism, and it has served me, but it also has hindered me. So it's just recognizing that and trying to find that balance and working through it. Yeah.
I think naturally we all have that self-preservation, and avoiding it is self-preservation at its highest. And sometimes we need to put things to the side and deal with it when we feel mentally and physically ready. What are some of the things that preparing to go back to work, like how did you do that? I know for me, going back to work was one of the hardest things I was trying to face after the loss of our son. What did you do physically, mentally in preparation? And then was there anything that you did in communicating with your team when you were going back as to what you needed?
It's a really great question because it was really, really difficult, and it's only since time has passed I've realised how difficult it was. So I was on maternity leave without a baby, and I had a lot of shame around that. It didn't feel right, and I was really struggling with what to do. And that's where I think it's really important with those connections and storytelling, because unfortunately there are a lot of people on maternity leave without a baby. But that is okay. You're still postpartum and you're grieving. But I found it very difficult. I really did put a lot of shame onto myself and guilt. So I really rushed going back to work. Jack was born in October, and by February I was already having the discussions with work, and I returned by late February, March.
Yeah, that's a quick turnaround. Yeah.
But I think the avoider in me, I also needed it, but I was really struggling because I didn't know what to do with my time, and I needed to keep my mind busy. And in a lot of ways, I suppose that having too much time to confront what happened was really difficult for me. So I did return to work quite early. I don't work in the easiest profession in terms of a lot of the work that I do is challenging. It is with people who have experienced an incredibly difficult thing in their life. So I work in criminal law, and I needed to make sure that my return to work, I didn't want it to jeopardise my confidence in that space. So I worked from home for a little while and then gradually returned to the office. And it was really, really difficult. And it isn't, I don't want to be, I'm certainly not critical of my workplace. I think it really is a reflection of society as a whole, not knowing what to do or say, not knowing how to have those difficult conversations and those kinds of things. So it's actually only been since my return to work this year after having Adeline, I have definitely felt more confident in asserting my boundaries and what I can and can't do. So this year I decided to take the step, along with the help of my psychologist, of setting some really firm work boundaries, and that's really, really helped. So I really wish that's something that I was able to do after returning with Jack, just having that guidance and that help. And once again, I think that's really missing when someone experiences a grief and trauma. That transition back to work can be really difficult, and it's really important to get it right. It's only been this year that I've been able to lead that a little bit more. But when I returned after Jack, the added complication was I was only there for a short time before I was pregnant with Adeline. So I also had the complication of returning to work, being pregnant after loss. And so, yeah, it was really, really difficult.
It's a really challenging couple of years, but I think that that's really great advice for people listening, that to set boundaries that you feel safe with and that can still get the job done, but that ultimately protects you. Is that kind of a good summary?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
In terms of what advice you would give if you were sitting here now with yourself at that time of losing Jack, what piece of advice would you like to give yourself to know that you can get through it?
Wow. I really treated grief and trauma like I had this checklist that I needed to race through. And so if I could go back and tell myself something, it would be that it's not this race. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. I think I was so set on making sure that I was okay and that things would be okay. And I didn't really stop to acknowledge the impact. So I would really tell myself to slow down and there was no rush. There's no checklist. I'm not going to get an A for rushing through and showing that I was, back to it.
An A+ griever.
Yeah, that's right. And I didn't want to acknowledge at the time that it was life-changing. And it has been, but not necessarily all for the negative. Just like I said before, Jack's story, it is a sad one, but it's also a really beautiful one. Of course, if we could have Jack here in our family, present physically in our lives, we would, but he's not. But that his story isn't just a sad one, and I wish people knew that and could talk to us about him and all the things that he brings to our lives, that he continues to bring to our lives. So I tell myself that too, that it's really hard, but it's also going to be a really beautiful life that is changing and is going to continue to change, and you're going to continue to learn. And just like you have to learn how to parent your living children, I'm going to have to learn how to parent Jack too.
And I think that's something we try to figure out every day, isn't it? How do we parent for children that aren't here? Because we can't hand that to anyone else. You can't get someone to babysit your lost child. We've got to figure that out ourselves. There's no break from that, is there?
No, there's not. Yeah.
Before we finish, I just wanted you to share a bit about your amazing work in this space, and has it been healing for you, the process of doing that? And I know it's taken a lot of work, but has it been positive to your healing?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. So when we left hospital, I think I mentioned before, we just didn't know about all of these amazing resources. So it wasn't only the resources into professional services, it was things like books and podcasts, Instagram accounts, support groups. All of these things in big and little ways really did save me. So I just couldn't believe that people didn't know about them. And it took me, I'd sit there at home and trying to find them. Like I said before, I found it really difficult to put the words to the pain that I was feeling. But often I would read something that someone else had posted on Instagram, and I think, yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly how I've been feeling. So I found all these amazing things, and I just thought, I just wish that they could be in the one place for someone so that they could, not everything is going to work for everyone. Some people are going to read books. Some people are going to listen to podcasts. So I just created a big list, basically, and I thought if I could give this to a bereaved family who came through the local hospital, that might really help them. So we did that, and my husband's business partner is a graphic designer, and he said, look, I'll put it into a proper booklet for you. So it really did organically happen. So we created this companion, we've called it. It's called A Little Help from Jack, and it's just full of all of these resources that we wish we had access to. So even things like sibling books. Now that was really helpful for Lydia, a little book to explain what had happened to her brother and that she could still continue that sibling relationship. So we put it all into a companion, and we printed 100 off to go to our local hospital. That was back in February 2023. And since then, it's grown really quite substantially. So we now distribute that companion across Australia. It's grown into a little help from Remy, which we're really passionate about, which has some additional resources for those experiencing the loss of their baby through termination for medical reasons. And it has really helped me, at least. And I don't want to say this thinking that, people need to do something with their grief. I think that is a really big misconception, that you need to start some foundation or charitable cause or write a book or do something amazing. You really don't. But for me, I am a really practical person and I need to do something. And so working on that, it really does keep me linked into him. It keeps Jack very present in our lives. It's a family affair. Nick and I both work on it. Lydia and Adeline help me pack the orders. It's been essential actually to where I am and how I continue to heal and grow and know that Jack has had an impact and that he can in some ways continue to live through us and hopefully help others.
It's beautiful, and it's a beautiful way to keep him here. As lost parents, we want to find ways of talking about them as much as we can. We want to say their name as much as we can, and to have that companion. Jack's name's out there all the time, and you get to circle back. I know it's time consuming and it's hard work, but I guess every time you get to pack those boxes, it must give you that fuzzy feeling, but also that weight of sadness as well, that unfortunately baby loss is happening every day across the world, but in Australia the statistics are still very high. It's a part of the healthcare system that numbers haven't improved for decades, and termination for medical reason anecdotally is probably going up. And so I think it's such an amazing thing that you're doing, and yeah, I'm very proud of you.
Oh, thank you.
I thank you so much for your sharing of Jack. I think what life dictates us, what society dictates to us to get back to work, to get on with it. As grievers, we hate the term moving on. We want to move forward because it means we're taking them with us. We're sort of expected to get back to work within a couple of weeks, a few days. Bereavement leave, according to Fair Work, is only 2 days in the legislation. So the expectations on us that we put on ourselves, I think, is a direct influence from general society. We just need to be a lot kinder to ourselves. And I think that's a really great piece of advice, is to slow down.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Emily. Joining me to unpack the last interview is Dr. Mai Frandsen. She is a psychologist, health behaviour change consultant and researcher based in Tasmania. She earned her PhD in psychology in 2012 and is internationally recognised for her work in promoting health behaviour change using incentives. Dr. Frandsen is the owner of Trig Psychology, a private practice located in Tasmania, where she focuses on health behaviour change, working with first responders, adolescents and adults navigating significant life transitions. Her approach is characterised by authenticity and pragmatism, drawing from her varied life experiences. She uses a range of psychological treatment paradigms to get the best outcome for her clients. In addition to her private practice, Dr. Frandsen serves as a psychologist in schools and is an associate researcher at the University of Tasmania. Her research primarily focuses on smoking cessation, particularly among pregnant women, and has led Tasmania-wide clinical trials exploring the efficacy of novel, incentive-based interventions. Having stepped away from active research, Mai's passion project is science communication and can often be heard on ABC Radio sharing mental health hacks. Originally from Denmark, she has called Tasmania home since 1994. Beyond her professional pursuits, she enjoys engaging in outdoor adventures, endurance sports, and travelling both locally and abroad with her sons. Hello, Mai.
Hello, Bianca.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So we've just listened to Emily talk about her awful and tragic loss of her son, Jack. And I wanted to start with the silence she experienced when she was delivered the news about Jack. And when she told me about that, I felt like that is a classic example of dissociating. Is that what you would describe it as?
Yes, and just just listening to her and hearing her describe that moment, trying to place yourself in her shoes, and even how painful that is as someone who's outside of that, I could just imagine. I was imagining the survival part of her brain just hitting the emergency button and going, I'm out of here. And the dissociation you talk about, I think what she's describing there is basically her doing an instantaneous analysis of what that this thing that's just happened is way outside of her capacity to deal with. And that silence, and then basically her thinking brain and her emotional brain have just gone in opposite directions because it was all just so much. And that's what she needed to do in that moment. That was her wonderful brain's way of keeping her alive in that moment. And when you think of the fight, flight, freeze response, yes, it feels good to be able to run away or to fight, but sometimes we know that's not going to help. And that the fact that our wonderful survival lizardy brain is able to make that instantaneous decision and go, yeah, no, we can't outrun this thing, can't fight this thing, so let's just pretend that we're not even here in our body.
Is that because of our innate sense of wanting to control every situation? Is that because our prefrontal cortex thinks that we have control over everything in our life?
When I think in that freeze response, and that's why it's such a unique response, it's that there's a quick assessment of this is beyond our capacity to deal with, and that actually there's nothing that we can do to deal with it. And I think that's why the freeze response is one of the most difficult to then work through after the fact, because there's so much guilt and unresolvedness with that, because I guess when you fight something, when you flee from something, you are able to discharge all the neurochemicals and the go juice that's expelled in that moment, right? But we don't get that when the trauma, the trigger is way beyond our capacity to deal with it, and that's what's happened. Her body's gone. Nope, there's nothing, we don't have the resources for this right now, so the only way I can protect you is pretend we're not here. And so what I thought was absolutely phenomenal with the way Emily was describing it was, despite all that, her beautiful brain said, so what can we deal with? And we can deal with 5 minutes at a time. I think my takeaway from all of that, man, we could talk about so many things, but I think that my takeaway from that was, like, trust your brain and be gentle and be grateful and have compassion for the decisions you make, for the things you say and do, because in that moment, your brain is doing the best job it can. You are doing the best job you can because you're part of that. And chunking her time in 5-minute doable bits is what kept her moving forward.
It's a phenomenal technique, and yeah, it's remarkable that she was able to do that. In terms of Emily talking about how she's a classic avoider, and I know her quite well now, and that's definitely been something that she has grappled with and has been quite harsh on herself about being a classic avoider. But I guess the way I view it is that was a coping mechanism. And would you say, was it an adaptive coping mechanism?
So I won't use Emily as an example because I don't have the pleasure of knowing her as well as you do, but certainly for clients and things like that, we use avoidance as an adaptive feature a lot of the time, and we should, and ideally we make an assessment of how full our cup is, if you want to use that metaphor, or how much extra stress we can take on today and whether or not we can deal with this thing. And so absolutely there's an adaptive feature of avoidance, because hopefully it's an internal assessment of, can we take on any more at the moment? And hopefully the answer is no. So avoidance is an adaptive function to a certain extent. And for other clients, they don't feel they're avoiding, they could, so often work with clients around Christmas time or anniversaries and things like that, which is a great time to avoid people because, for certain clients, because they don't know if they're going to have the capacity to deal with the stress that might ensue. So walking into a family environment that has its challenges, has its whatever, there might be some toxicity or whatever, they know beforehand from experience that they may not have the capacity to deal with whatever comes up. And so for them, the safest thing for them to do is to avoid putting themselves in that situation. And then, of course, some people avoid so much that it doesn't help. Doesn't help them heal, doesn't help them move forward. If I'm working with clients, how they identify that is to teach them to check in with themselves, to teach them firstly, which is really hard, especially if you've been great at avoiding, is to kind of dip in and they talk about pendulum, right? Being able to dip into, well, why am I doing this? How am I feeling right now? And sometimes that can be really scary for people and they need to just swing in and out of that a little bit. So why am I avoiding this? And being really honest with yourself. And I guess the first thing in therapy is the two rules are don't bullshit me and don't bullshit yourself, right? And the first one is the number one rule, and then we'll work through the second one. But sometimes that actually takes a lot of unraveling first. It's like, why am I avoiding this? Is it because I don't think I'm ready? Is it because I don't have time? Or is it because I'm scared of failing? I'm scared that this won't help. That if I do this thing, does that mean that I'm ready to go into the world? So it's until you can actually answer the question of why you're avoiding, can you determine whether or not it's adaptive anymore? So that's the first place, I guess I would say.
There's two things there that I picked up is prioritize yourself. Is that if you need to avoid certain family situations, certain social situations, you put yourself first and you do avoid them because that's going to be healthier and better for you.
Yep.
And that there's such a fine line of how long you do avoid. And that really requires a professional or someone experienced in mental health and wellness that can identify if someone's perhaps had too much avoidance, that it's become maladaptive and detrimental to their life and to their health.
Yeah.
I used to love the show Hoarders, and I still do. I still love to see a transformation clean. I love that there's short reels and stuff that show that these days. It's a quick fix. But I remember watching Hoarders as a bit of a nesting thing as I was preparing to have our third child, Rani. And I was so dissociated because pregnancy after loss, for me, that was a really, really, really hard time. And so I was doing everything possible to distract myself. So I was doing a million different things around the house. And I had Hoarders on in the background because it had just hit binge. It just dropped all the series into binge. And I watched it for the first time in years. And I realised that every single episode, the reason why those people were so unhappy and unwell was because they were grieving. Every single story was because they were grieving someone significant in their life and they had not dealt with it.
Yep. I haven't watched Hoarders. I have my own guilty pleasures, but that's not one of them. But there is, I think probably without very many exceptions, there is always an underlying reason for these sort of more unique characteristics or behaviours that we do. It takes you to be brave to actually to unpack that. And for Emily to recognise that within herself it's tricky and it's scary. And yeah, absolutely working with a professional in this, or I think just talking to someone that you feel safe with. Because I think what's really, really cool about talking, whether it's with a therapist or someone you're really close to, that where the language centre is in the brain, our internal monologue, how we talk to ourselves is stored in a very different part of the brain to where we speak and our spoken word. And it's actually only when we articulate, and some of us do it more than others, but are concurrently problem solving and speaking at the same time, or working through something in our brain and speaking at the same time, that things actually fall into place. And this is why for most of us, doing CBT on yourself doesn't work. Whereas when you're having a chat or a vent to a girlfriend over wine, that's when stuff puts into place. And that's not just because your friend's amazing and so is wine. It's actually because speaking it out loud, articulating your feelings, how you're thinking, and your different options and alternatives, whatever, that's the good stuff. So talk to your girlfriends and drink wine. I think it's the lesson there.
I'll take that advice every single day of the week. And Emily touches on that journaling was suggested to her and that was not for her. And that goes to show that different things work for different people. For me, journaling was really helpful. I really enjoyed getting things out onto paper or typing them out. That helped order it for me as well.
Yep. And thank you. I guess journaling goes in the same boat as speaking out loud to someone. It's putting it out there. It's putting into a much more sort of formalised expression of thought. Yeah, and so that works as well.
My last question for you from Emily's chat is, her and I have experienced a lot of uncomfortable conversations to do with baby loss because it is such a taboo topic. People feel so uncomfortable to raise it, to acknowledge it, and it's caused us a lot of grief. I know I speak on behalf of her to say that it's caused us a lot of pain. What are some suggestions from you as a professional, both for people that know someone who's been through something really difficult, but also for the person that's on the receiving end of someone who can't acknowledge something, what we can do, I guess, to try and regulate for our emotions?
Yep, absolutely. I'll start with that to validate that absolutely I was and am sometimes that person who finds immense discomfort in sitting with someone else who you know has experienced something huge or is in distress. And sure, now that I'm a psych and deal with, I'm exposed to certain things working with people who are suicidal or doing risk assessments with people. So I'm really comfy in that space now because I've had the training and I've had practice, right? I'm practicing having those difficult conversations every day. But I know what it feels like to have that horrible feeling of like, I want to be able to express to this person how sorry I am, but that sounds lame. Is that enough? Is that person, if I say that, are they in a safe place right now? I'm reminding them of that. What if I don't say anything? If I ignore them, does that make me a jerk? If I say something, who am I to come into their space? It's a private space. So I'm thinking all this, let alone what you're thinking, which is, why are you avoiding me? Aren't you seeing what we're feeling? So I guess what I'd say to that is put your ego aside maybe, and probably in both of our cases, if we can, just appreciate that there are two people that we're talking about, or multiple, but like it's how you're feeling, but you're also trying to feel how they might be feeling, and that's a really difficult thing because you're looking at them through your lens. So if you want to do something, the way of not complicating it is to take a deep breath. This is my suggestion. And take a deep breath so you're preparing yourself rather than going, I could say this, what if this happens? So take a deep breath, try to become present and just think about how you want to arrive. So what's the outcome here? And I think for most of us, the outcome is I want to express that I feel. I want to express, and I don't like the word sorry. And I know you and Emily have had lots of conversations and the rest of your wonderful community of what these different words mean. But I guess at the end of the day, you're the person approaching, what's the outcome? I want them to know that I'm thinking of them. And so that's it. You're not trying to fix them. You're not trying to do anything. You're not trying to even try and understand, right? All you want to do is to express to them that you're thinking of them. And I think if you just acknowledge that and then embrace the awkward, be there. And I think one of the easiest things to say is like, I don't know what to say, because that's the truth. And would that be enough?
100%.
Yeah.
And I know for me, I am absolutely fine and I appreciate when people say, I'm so sorry for your loss. Some people in the loss world, they don't like that, and that's fine. We all have our own thing. For me, that is 100% more than enough, is for someone just to acknowledge it, just to know that they are thinking about me and my situation and my story, and more so that they're thinking not so much about me, actually, it's thinking about my son. Who's not here, to know that they're thinking about the person that's not here. And I know it's so uncomfortable. Even I find it difficult to reach out sometimes or to say something to another lost mum. I overthink it. I go, oh my God, I'm going to say the wrong thing. Maybe they don't like the word sorry. I don't want them to think that I know it all or I'm this grief guru. Like I'm still fumbling my way through it. I just saw in the street Richard Scollier, who is now terminally ill. He's been given a short time to live, as we've all seen in the media recently. And he was supporting someone elderly who needed assistance to walk down the street. And I wanted to say something to him, but I overthought it. I wanted to say, I'm thinking of you and I'm so sorry. But I freaked out and I couldn't do it. And then I walked away regretting not having acknowledged him. But I thought, oh, he's busy. He's trying to support someone else. you know, they're trying to walk down the street. He's probably just wanting to go about his day.
Yeah.
And even though I've been through what I've been through, I overthought it.
Yeah.
And I walked away, and I regret now not having said just a little something.
But again, some compassion for yourself in that moment of made an analysis of what you could do in that moment. And because you were a bit jumbled and whatever else, maybe you would have said something that you then regretted or whatever. I guess a couple of things on that one. The other thing, I guess, for the person who is walking around in a world with a loss, just recognizing that some people might not be able to, because of what's happened for them, their bucket's full and you might be a trigger for them. And so it's not because they're not thinking of you or rude or whatever. It might be that they aren't able to enter that space. And I would say that's a lot for a lot of time. I guess for the people on the other bit, I think I can say the same for me in my own history. If that person who has gone through something recently, through the loss that we're talking about, if they are in the world, if they've gone to the supermarket, if they're walking down the street, they probably have got capacity. They're probably entered the world and are able to, they know full well that they're probably going to see someone. So maybe the fact that they're out and about is a sign. And I wonder also just the power of a smile. Just an actual genuine locking eyes with that person and a smile is enough sometimes.
That's true. And it can be a knowing smile as well. I smiled and said hello to Richard. And I hope that he could tell that I wanted to say more, but I chose not to. For me, being on the receiving end, I know that can be definitely enough. He's just a nod and a smile. Yeah. Do you have any suggestions on when you do feel unseen and unheard and unacknowledged? And it can be really, like, sometimes for me, it had sent me into panic attacks. Do you have any suggestions on what could maybe help regulate you in that moment where you aren't able to kind of escape the room?
I mean, that's the same probably for anyone experiencing a panic attack. You're going to be able to rationalise yourself out of that one. So definitely presence, so the grounding stuff. There's lots of strategies. The 5 senses I really like. That's a really easy one. So look around. What are the 5 things you can see? What are 5 things you can hear? 5 things you can, that's if you want to be really tricky, smell, touch and feel is a great one. Breathing. And we could do a whole other episode on this because I think breathing's given lip service and everyone rolls their eyes, I know how to breathe. But actually, even just the mechanics of it, just slowing your breath, and it's overcomplicated. You know, you should breathe in for 7 seconds, hold for 2, do a little 12, breathe out, whatever. But it's really, really simplified. Our heart rates go up as we breathe in and our heart rates go down as we breathe out. The medical people out there will be able to explain it with fancier words, but that's how it goes. So as long as you're breathing out, if you slow your breathing and breathe out for longer than you breathe that in, you will convince your body that you're safe and you will start to relax. Now, sometimes that requires you removing yourself from the room, but it's those primal physiological hacks, body hacks, if you like, that you need to engage to regulate yourself if you're having that moment, if you're having a panic attack as you were describing. So there's no point trying to think yourself out of that one. Touch, whether that's rubbing your arms, whatever, touching the person next to you who you feel safe with in that moment, but not trying to actually talk or have anyone say, are you okay? Tell me how you're feeling, because that doesn't work. If you're not quite there, but those cognitive traps or those things of no one understands me, how dare the world go on? How dare people continue with their lives? They have no idea what I've gone through. The audacity of that. Gently checking the facts, gently checking in with yourself. And did that person stick their tongue out at me and go, I definitely don't want to talk to you? Or what might be another explanation for this? And trying to see it from their point of view. Did they have 6 kids hanging off them and they're in the supermarket and now's not the right time? But that's not always easy either.
No, and I've definitely been, especially when I've been at work, had that situation where someone has taken out their frustrations on me and it sent me into a panic attack in those early days. And I thought I could handle being at work. And the mindfulness sort of stuff, which I know people glaze over when you say mindfulness, but the 5 senses thing worked really well for me. That grounded me and gave me the ability to be able to overcome my panic attacks, certainly with a lot of practice and certainly practice when I'm not in a panic attack. so that I could access that when I was in a panic attack was what helped me be able to actually remain at work. I'd be able to have a moment, and then I'd be able to get control and then go back onto the restaurant floor, as opposed to in the early days it would wipe me out completely and I just need to leave. But I would really try to go, okay, what happened in their day? What's going on in their life? Maybe their dog just died. Maybe they've just lost their mum. Maybe they've just been sacked. And it takes, obviously, you've got to be in a pretty decent place yourself to be able to have that empathy or sympathy perhaps for someone else's situation and not your own. But I know that I had to just go, well, he doesn't know my story. He doesn't know what I'm going through. And I fronted up to work, so he probably thinks that everything's fine and dandy. So it's really challenging. It takes a lot of effort. But I guess with the right sort of assistance and tools in your toolbox, like that 5 senses sort of stuff and breath work, and we could do a whole session talking about breath work. I've certainly done some really interesting trauma breath work sessions, and the power of breath, there's a lot to it that can be really helpful to people that I think the Western world is only just waking up to now. Yeah. So yeah, they're really good tips. Thank you so much, and thanks for joining us. Thank you for listening. This podcast is dedicated to my son Herbert and to all the fellow grievers out there. I'm sorry that you're here. Be kind to others, but mostly to yourself. Before we wrap up, I'd just like to mention that whilst I do have a degree in behavioural science and have spent years educating myself and researching the topics of trauma and mental health, I'm not a licensed therapist, counsellor or psychologist. Everything I share here is based on personal experience and things I've learnt through education. This podcast is for informational or entertainment purposes only and isn't the substitute for professional advice. If you're struggling, please reach out to a GP or a qualified therapist. You're not alone, and there is help available.